Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Vicki Durian and Nancy Santomero were hitchhiking on their way to the Rainbow Family Gathering in June 1980 when they disappeared. This was an annual gathering of hippies and free-thinking people where they would celebrate harmony, peace, and freedom at Monongahela National Forest. But after the two young women accepted a ride from a quiet young man driving a Chevy Nova, they were never seen alive again. Join us at the quiet end for the Rainbow Girl murders. Someone murdered Nancy and Vicki in cold blood, leaving their bodies to be found on a remote mountainside. But 12 years into the investigation, an innocent man was charged and convicted of their killings. And this man would spend years in prison before the real killer would be brought to justice. Today, we'll talk about this fascinating case and discuss why the wrong man was sent to prison and a cold-blooded killer was left free to kill again. What do we have for a beer today, Dickie?
So this is our first West Virginia beer.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I haven't had very many of them beers from West Virginia.
I'm not surprised.
But I have a pretty good one. This is called Halleck Pale Ale from the Chestnut Brew Works in Morgantown. It's an American pale ale that's 6% alcohol by volume. This is maybe, if not the state beer of West Virginia, at least a very well-known one.
Okay, well, I'm anxious to try it.
So it's a hazy orange, nice white head, a little bit of lacing. Aroma's nice, sweet malt, little fruit. Taste of caramel orange, maybe some pine, your favorite, late. It's got some moderate bitterness, and I like it.
Okay, then. Open one up for me.
Okay.
All right, bring it down here to the quiet end, and we're going to talk about this case. Now, it's quite a while ago, but I really find it super interesting.
Oh, me too. This is just an absolutely fascinating case.
Yeah. When I started to read about it, I had no idea how much there really was to it.
So let's get started.
Sure.
Robert Temple Must would never forget June 25th, 1980. The 31-year-old had left his remote cabin in West Virginia that Wednesday morning so he could drive into town, do his laundry and shopping, and then home again. In the evening, he ate dinner at a friend's house and then headed back home. 9 o'clock in the evening, he's parking his car on this dirt lane near his home off Briary Knob Road. He saw two bodies lying motionless in the grass, just a few feet away. When he walked down to where they were, he saw the blood. He saw their eyes were wide open. They were obviously dead. Must drove to a friend's house to call the police, but no one was home. So he went on to another neighbor's house. They were home. He made the call to the police. Pocahontas Sheriff's Department Deputy Randy Doss met Must several minutes later and followed him to where the bodies were. The bodies were two young women. They had been shot repeatedly, so the detective called for backup.
That sounds like a wise decision. At about 11:30 p.m., West Virginia State Police Trooper Robert Elkire was at home asleep when his telephone rang. Police headquarters was calling to tell him to report to Briary Knob for a double homicide. He was ordered to assist Pocahontas County deputies and other state police who were already at the scene. After he was given directions to the mountain, he drove toward the scene. But Elkire hadn't driven very far when dispatch contacted him on his car radio and told him to go to Pocahontas Memorial Hospital in Marlington instead. The bodies had already been sent there. At the hospital, Elkire met Dr. Height, the county coroner, as well as Stephen Hunter, the Pocahontas County prosecuting attorney. The two Jane Does had been shot to death. Since their bodies had been warm when the deputy arrived, it was believed that they had died within 3 to 4 hours of being found. One victim had been shot twice, and it looked like the other had been shot at least 3 times. The next day, the bodies were autopsied in South Charleston, West Virginia. An assistant medical examiner performed the autopsy on the older of the two, Vicki Durian. She had died of 2 gunshots to her left chest. One of her gunshot wounds in the upper quadrant of her breast had been shot at very close range. The other gunshot wound passed through the breast tissue and re-entered her body. Only 2 fragments of the bullets were recovered. The doctor noted that she had consumed a very small amount of alcohol. She had a blood alcohol level of 0.01%.
That's nothing.
Yes. And her urine tested negative for marijuana metabolites or any other drugs.
Yeah, you got to check those damn hippies' urine, make sure they're not smoking that weed.
Of course.
The chief medical examiner for the state of West Virginia performed Nancy Santomero's autopsy. She had died from gunshot wounds to her head and chest. Her body showed evidence of close-range firing also. Nancy had a blood alcohol level of 0.08% and a urine alcohol level of 0.14%. And again, no marijuana or other drugs were found in the urine screen.
The bodies of both women were swabbed for traces of semen, but none was found, and they were both fully dressed. The time of death of the women was estimated to have been at about 7 p.m. After spending time with the police at the crime scene on June 25th, Must was taken to the West Virginia State Police headquarters, and his hands were swabbed for gunpowder residue. He waived his right to an attorney and was interviewed by the police as well, and he gave a written statement. The police really had no idea who the 2 young victims were or why they had been shot. So the next morning, June 26th, West Virginia State Police Corporal Hott, Trooper Robert Elkire, and Trooper W.P. Baker, who had all spent the night working on the case, showed up at dawn on Briary Knob and started their examination of the crime scene. They combed the ground where the bodies were found, looking for evidence that might have been missed the night before. They made plaster casts of tire tracks and went over the area with a metal detector, and they found some shattered car windshield glass, but nothing else. The troopers then canvassed the few residents living on Briary Knob. A woman named Virginia, who lived with her common-law husband and their baby in the house closest to the area where the bodies had been found, said that at about 5 p.m. she heard 3 or 4 shots coming down from the mountain. But from her house she couldn't see the road at all or the site where the bodies were found. She said that she was sure that she had heard the shots at about 5, though, because that was when she always fed her baby. She told the police that her husband, Arnold Cutlip, had been gone all day and had not returned until later that evening, so Cutlip would be interviewed later.
Mr. and Mrs. Howard Stanley were interviewed next. They hadn't seen or heard anything unusual on the night of the 25th. Harold McMillan, a 77-year-old blind man, said that he had heard several shots fired at about 7 p.m., and McMillan knew it was 7 p.m. because that's the time he always fed his pigs.
Yeah, so a bit of a contradiction already. Yeah.
Although it looks like from their estimate of the time of death around 7, looks like the pig guy was closer.
Well, yeah, but they were really just estimating that based on a guess. They really had no evidence.
Well,
they just knew it was fairly recent.
Yes.
So at about 4:30 p.m., the West Virginia Chief Medical Examiner came in by police helicopter to look at the crime scene. He suggested taking soil samples from where the bodies were found so that they could be x-rayed for any bullet fragments. Before he left Briary Knob, he held a news conference with reporters near the site. He described the victims' wounds and told the reporters what they had been wearing, hoping that might help someone come forward and identify them. Identifying the 2 female bodies was proving to be difficult. Their fingerprints had been sent to the FBI in Washington, but the response had quickly come back as unknown.
Yeah, well, these young ladies are maybe not exactly transients, but...
Not at all transients,
They traveled around a lot.
They did. I wouldn't call them transients.
Well, I was looking for some kind of word.
Okay. They were free spirits.
Okay, sure.
And they were very brave. I couldn't believe the way they traveled and hitchhiked.
Well, it was 40 years ago.
I suppose, but I remember 40 years ago I was a kid and we would never have thought of doing that. Although I guess I was always a bit of a fraidy cat.
See?
Yeah. But anyway, they hadn't had their fingerprints done before, which isn't surprising. A lot of people haven't, especially 40 years ago. So let's talk a bit about these victims. That spring, Victoria Durian had been living in a Tucson apartment with a roommate, and she was working as a home care nurse's aide. She liked working in home health care because she could get time off whenever she needed it. Vicki met Nancy Santomero at another friend's house, introducing herself as Bright Star. And despite the 7 years of age difference, Nancy was 19 and Vicki was 26, the two women became really good friends. They bonded over both being Scorpios, so they were both into astrology too. Vicki liked Nancy's gentle smile and her really laid-back personality, and Nancy really admired the older woman's intelligence and her self-confidence. She was very self-confident.
Well, I think you have to be if you're hitchhiking around the country. You have to have some degree of confidence.
You have to be bold.
Right.
I agree.
So Nancy Santomero had just graduated from high school in 1978, and she'd gone on to the State University of New York, SUNY, in Buffalo. But things were not good for her there. Nancy lived in an old cramped apartment in a crappy part of town, and she didn't like her roommate. What's worse, she couldn't afford to pay for school and her daily expenses on her own, so she was always broke. And to top it all off, she was homesick in Buffalo. She missed her family and friends back home. So Nancy decided not to stay in Buffalo, and she returned to her home in Huntington, New York.
So I guess that's why I have trouble calling them transients, because they did have homes with their parents that they could go to. They were just choosing this lifestyle.
They did, but they were kind of rootless. I mean, they did have kind of a home base, but they traveled a lot.
They did, with no money.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy, really, but you have to admire them in one way. Now, back in high school, Nancy had a friend named Lisa. While Lisa was visiting Huntington between semesters at the University of Arizona, the two got together. Then Lisa suggested that Nancy should visit her in Tucson. She could stay in her apartment and look into enrolling at the University of Arizona. The warmth of Arizona sounded really good to Nancy, so she accepted Lisa's invitation to visit her in Tucson. But Nancy didn't want to use the little money that she had to buy a bus ticket. And she wouldn't ask her family for a loan either. She was very proud. So she hitchhiked from Long Island, New York to Tucson, Arizona, and she had no issues along the way. So that was a relief for her and her parents.
Well, I guess. So Nancy arrived in Tucson in the fall of 1979. She was excited about living with Lisa and starting over in sunny Arizona. But the cost of tuition, plus the additional out-of-state fees, made enrollment at the University of Arizona impossible for her to afford. So she took a job at a donut shop. Now, at the time, Lisa was focused on her studies. To Lisa, Nancy had no direction in life. So after a while, the two friends grew apart. And in January of 1980, Nancy decided to look for another place to live.
Yeah, but with only the earnings from the donut shop, which, as you can imagine, were meager, Nancy's options were very limited. So she ended up moving into a Tucson commune. 7 adults and 3 children were living in the house when she moved in. And then there were other people, too, who would just come and go. She really wanted a place of her own and some privacy, but she was still unwilling to admit to her failures and return home. So she stayed in Tucson, and meeting Vicki Durian was a real bright spot in an otherwise difficult time in Nancy's life. Vicki had another friend who was living in Tucson, and this was 19-year-old Liz Jondro. Liz had moved to a hippie commune about 2 hours away from Tucson. When she went into the city, she always visited her friend Vicki. Liz left Arizona in May of 1980, but before she went, she told Vicki about a gathering that was happening in West Virginia that July. She even gave Vicki a flyer about the gathering. Everyone everywhere was invited to the Monongahela National Forest July 1st to 7th for the Rainbow Family World Peace Gathering. Now, the Rainbow Family is a group of people committed to nonviolence and world peace, and they hold an annual festival in national parks. They still do that to this day. So the 1980 flyer read, "The Rainbow Family is all the people of this world. we gather in remote places in the cathedral of nature to be free from pollution and confusion, and to be able to come together for a week of work, play, learning, loving, healing, and sharing. Come share your visions and ideas to make this gathering an example of paradise, and to promote and further peace on earth, love among all people, and harmony between ourselves and our beautiful and beloved Mother Earth. Now, I know you probably are thinking this is a little flaky, Dickie. To me, it sounds wonderful.
You caught me.
Yes, you were giving it the hairy eyeball, as they say.
Or the side eye, whatever.
Yeah, but it does sound wonderful.
Well, it's just not my cup of tea.
Right.
So to each his own.
But, this was 1980, too, so we were still closer to the hippie movement.
That we were.
Yep.
So Liz called Vicki from Oregon later in May. She wanted to attend the Rainbow Gathering in West Virginia. And Vicki thought the trip sounded fun, so she told Liz that a friend, Nancy, might want to go along with them. So all three decided to go to the Rainbow Gathering together. But before they left for the festival, Vicki and Nancy planned to go to Iowa to spend a few days at Vicki's parents' farm. The plan was that Liz would meet them in Iowa in June, and then they would all travel together to West Virginia. Vicki and Nancy planned to hitchhike from Tucson to Iowa. When Liz arrived, they would all hitchhike to the Monongahela Forest. All three had traveled around the country by thumbing rides before, and nothing bad had ever happened to them.
Yeah, it wasn't something that they really worried about, as most of us would think. Hitchhike across the country, a young woman, are you crazy?
No kid.
Especially as true crime people, right? We would never do that.
We can think of all sorts of horrible things that can go on.
We certainly can, yeah. But they just didn't have that outlook on life, and I kind of admire that. I'm a little jealous that they didn't have the horrible thoughts that I would always have about something like this. So even though it doesn't seem very wise, it is admirable in a way. So anyway, Liz arrived in Iowa on the 15th or the 16th of June. She spent a few days with Vicki and Nancy on Howard and Clarabelle Durian's farm. Vicki's mom, Clarabelle, gave the girls a ride to an interstate highway where they would begin their journey. Now, can you imagine dropping your daughter and her friends off on the highway to go off and hitchhike across the country?
2,000 miles from their destination.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know how many miles exactly, but it's a long ways.
Well, it's southwest to the northeast.
It is. So as you can imagine, Vicki's mom, Clarabelle, was not thrilled with this situation at all. She worried about her daughter and her friends, quite rightly. They were wonderful people, but she knew they were a bit naive. So she actually cried as she said goodbye, but Vicki reassured her that they would be fine. They'd done this a bunch of times, and she'd be back before they even knew it.
So Liz would remember spending 5.5 days on the road with her two friends. The first day, they traveled through Missouri, ending up in either Indiana or Illinois. Liz wasn't sure.
One of those I states.
Yeah, one of those I states. The first night on the road, they bought salads and pizza. And then they found they didn't have any more money. So from that point on, they had to depend on the kindness of strangers.
So that is really living for the moment, truly.
I guess. Just sounds like something I would never want to do.
Well, no, you wouldn't. You're a boy that went right from high school to college to med school. This is not something that would ever have occurred to you.
You're right. I wouldn't have.
So Vicki had a way with people, and she was the one who did most of the talking. Most of their rides were with men, especially truck drivers. And when they asked if she and her friends were hungry, she would say, yeah, we are. And the truckers were pretty generous with the young women, so they never went hungry. But as they traveled through Kentucky, they found that not all of the men who offered them rides were kind and generous. They ended up escaping one driver who had waved a gun at them, and another guy started talking about sex and tried to grope Vicki. All three women had jumped out of that car after Vicki sprayed him with mace right in the face. So when the three arrived in Charleston, West Virginia, they were close to their destination. But they weren't ready to go to the Rainbow Gathering yet. It didn't begin for a few more days. So they caught a ride with someone who was returning to his home on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, and they spent the night there. So they were going out of their way, but it didn't seem to bother them.
Yeah, we'll always turn around and go back.
Certainly, there's always a car that you can get a ride with.
Sure.
If you're not afraid.
So the next day, it's pouring rain in South Carolina, and the girls decided to go back to West Virginia. They got a ride to Fayetteville, North Carolina, from a bus driver who saw them on the side of the road as he was driving his empty bus back to the station. But then in Fayetteville, Liz said she's done. She wanted to leave her friends and go back to her family's home in Vermont. So Liz called home, found out that her father was getting remarried in a few days. So she decided to forget about the rainbow gathering and go to her father's wedding. Liz would say later that she actually had an uneasy feeling on the trip, and finding about her father's wedding gave her a nice excuse to go her own way and get out of the situation.
Yeah, but you have to wonder if that's just in retrospect after hearing what happened to her friends.
Hindsight's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, then she might have thought, oh yeah, I was uneasy. Or it may have just been those 2 close calls that they had with the mace and the gun.
Well,
Maybe that was enough.
2.
Well, she said it was 2.
Okay.
There was a guy with a gun and the guy who groped Vicki that they got away from.
Yeah.
And everybody else was cool, they said.
Good.
But anyway, the 3 got a ride to just outside of Richmond, Virginia. At the intersection of Interstate Highways 64 and 95, on Wednesday, June 25th, 1980, they made plans to meet up after the gathering and the wedding. After the Rainbow Gathering, Nancy and Vicki would hitchhike to Vermont to see Liz. Now that's quite a ways, too.
Yeah, it's a good trip. So about 1 p.m. on the 25th, Liz caught a ride north on 95 and waved goodbye to Vicki and Nancy. They had no money and carried just 2 backpacks, 2 sleeping bags, a tent, and a set of bongo drums.
Well, the basic necessities, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Liz would later give 2 different accounts of how she and the other 2 women parted that day. In the first version, she said that she went to get a drink of water, returned to the road, and her friends had already got a ride and were gone. But then in the second version, she said that Nancy and Vicki were on one side of the road as she stood with her thumb out on the other side of the road. Either way, she had not seen who picked up Vicki and Nancy.
So let's now move on and talk about the guy who did pick up Vicki and Nancy and ended up murdering them near Robert Temple Musk's West Virginia cabin on that same day, June 25th. This is a really, really horrible, evil, twisted man.
One of the worst we've ever covered, and that's saying something.
Yeah, we've covered some doozies.
We certainly have. James Clayton Vaughn Jr. was born in Mobile, Alabama on April 13, 1950. Like Nancy and Vicki, Vaughn grew up in a big family. But unlike Nancy and Vicki, Vaughn did not grow up in a happy home. He had a mentally disturbed, violent father and a mother who wasn't much better. Both parents were alcoholics. So a good day was one when he was ignored and neglected. A bad day was when he was beaten unconscious. So it's hard to imagine growing up that way.
Yeah.
It's just really
a good day
horrible.
is just to be totally ignored.
I know, it's heartbreaking.
After Vaughn's father was discharged from the service, he sometimes worked as a butcher and sometimes as a house painter, but most of the time he didn't work at all. Sometimes, after he'd finished painting a house, he'd go back and burglarize the place, then he could stay home and drink for as long as the money lasted. There's a good outlook.
That's bad. Well, Vaughn's mother had grown up on an Alabama farm with her parents, who were German immigrants. People in Alabama didn't like Germans after the First World War, so she was bullied at school. She didn't have it easy at home either. Her parents were poor and they treated her like a field worker. So according to Vaughn, his parents hated one another. They fought constantly, both verbally and physically. And after they separated, things did not improve. The kids grew up in poverty and never had enough to eat. They were bullied at school for being dirty and having ragged clothes. By the time he was 17, Vaughn was having dark thoughts. His earlier religious beliefs were now replaced by a perverse version of Christianity taught by the Ku Klux Klan. In 1967, Vaughn joined Robert Shelton's United Klans of America. Not too long after that, he moved to a more extreme group, George Lincoln Rockwell's National Socialist White People's Party, formerly known as the American Nazi Party. He read their newspaper, which was called White Power, and was really engrossed in the culture of hate. Hitler's Mein Kampf replaced the Bible Vaughn had carried around with him, and he got a swastika armband, and he would stand in front of a mirror to practice his Nazi salute.
So he's going all in here.
All in.
Now, when he was 17, Vaughn dropped out of high school. He was still in the 11th grade and was failing. And then before he moved out of his mother's home, he punched her during an argument that had turned violent. Vaughn's sister called the police, and Vaughn spent 14 days in jail. When he was released, Vaughn left Alabama and moved to Atlanta. He would never see his mother or father again, and that's the way he preferred it. He is free from their abuse, but he was already very mentally damaged and basically was out to hurt people.
Oh, absolutely he was. When he was 18, he became an official supporter of the National Socialist White People's Party, and for the next 5 years, he kept in intermittent contact with this white supremacist group. Vaughn got married to a 16-year-old when he was 19. They divorced after just a few months. His wife would later claim that Vaughn would disappear for days, telling her that he had secret agent work to do. She was far too afraid of him to ever ask him any questions. For the next decade, Vaughn went from one menial job to another, not lasting more than a few weeks anywhere. Some places he'd work for just a few hours. He had trouble getting along with people, to put it mildly, and he'd often storm off in a rage.
By 1976, Vaughn was tired of being broke, so he decided to become a mercenary, a soldier of fortune. He thought about enlisting in the Army of South Africa or Rhodesia. Now, the only obstacle to this, Vaughn thought, was his arrest record. From August 1967 until September 1976, he had been arrested 7 times. He probably could have been arrested twice as many times.
Well, yeah, I think the statistics are like, with petty crime, you get arrested once or twice for every 10 you commit. Yeah, so he'd probably done at least 70 crimes.
So his first arrest, the only one for which he served any jail time, was for the assault on his mother. A later disorderly conduct charge, 2 charges for carrying a concealed weapon, 1 charge of contributing to the delinquency of a minor by purchasing alcohol, and 2 charges of assault and battery, and both of these were chemical mace attacks on interracial couples. All these charges were dropped without a conviction. The solution that one thought up was to change his name. So in September 1976, Vaughn legally changed his name to Joseph Paul Franklin. He chose Franklin because he admired Benjamin, and Joseph Paul was in honor of the Third Reich's Minister for Propaganda and Public Enlightenment, Paul Joseph Goebbels.
Yeah, so not surprisingly, Franklin never did become a mercenary. He continued living his life as usual. This meant living in cheap rented rooms and moving from one low-paying job to another. He began to drink from the time he got up in the morning until he passed out at night. Franklin's thoughts became darker, and he thought a lot about making his violent fantasies his reality. One day, he had driven past a synagogue in Baltimore, and watching people exit the building after services, he thought about how easy it would be to hide in the bushes and shoot them all as they walked out into the parking lot. So someone who thinks like that is very sick.
Yes. In fact, it's probably like a time bomb waiting to go off.
I think that, yeah, that's a good way to put it. Franklin's violent fantasies did become a reality one winter night. This was in February or March of 1977. He was renting a room from a family in Alexandria, and he had just quit a job. So he was completely out of money. And then right at midnight, they knocked on his door and told him he had to pay 2 weeks back rent or move out. So with nowhere to go, he had to go outside and sleep in his car. And lying in the old car that didn't even have a working heater, he decided that he had had enough. He really had nothing to lose. It still took Franklin a few more weeks, though, to get up the nerve to get started on his new mission. But when he did, his first task was to get money to fund it.
On June 16, 1977, Franklin robbed his first bank. He had watched the place for days, so he knew there was no armed guard. And the robbery went better than he expected. He got away with about $1,000. And although the robbery had been scary, it was also a real rush for him. Franklin decided that he had found his new career. He stopped drinking and took his life in a new direction, robbing banks.
Mm-hmm.
This made him happy, but he knew eventually he's going to get caught.
But really, robbing banks was just a way to get money to do the more violent crimes he had in mind. And robbery really wasn't enough to satisfy him for very long.
No, or even if it did satisfy him for a time, it wasn't going to be continually to satisfy him.
No, he really wanted to commit murder. I mean, to be frank, that's it. And one early victim was Rebecca Bergstrom. She was a lot like Nancy Santomero, Vicki Durian, and Liz Jondrow, a free spirit. In 1980, 20-year-old Rebecca had dropped out of the University of Wisconsin, and she'd left Madison. She started traveling America, working an odd job here and there, meeting new people, and living a really carefree lifestyle. She sometimes drove her own car, sometimes rode with friends, and very often she would hitchhike. After working a job in Florida for a while, she used the money she had earned to take a vacation in Jamaica. And after she returned from Jamaica in April of 1980, she called up her parents and she told them she was on her way to visit a friend in Las Vegas. So on April 10th, Rebecca called home to tell her parents that she had arrived in Las Vegas safely. The next time her father heard from her, she called him from Denver, Colorado on April 22nd. She told him that she was getting a ride back to Wisconsin with a friend, she planned to stay at home for a while, and she would consider going back to school. So this was great news for her parents. This gave them hope that she would be safe, and now she'd settle down. Maybe she got her wanderlust out of her system.
Maybe. But Joseph Paul Franklin was in Madison, Wisconsin on May 3rd, 1980, looking for a bank to rob. So by this time he considered himself a professional. He had succeeded in doing more than a dozen robberies. At the same time, he was also by then an experienced killer. He had shot 20 people, 18 to death, in his mission to kill enemies of the white race. Anybody that is non-white, or an interracial couple, or Jews, or you name it.
Yeah, he really hated the interracial, he called it race mixing. He did not like that at all.
No.
And so these numbers of how many people he shot, those would come from him in interviews later on. So we're not sure about that.
This is his statement.
Yeah, that's from what he would say. So that Friday morning, Franklin was driving past Easttown Mall on the east side of Madison. 3 years earlier, he had committed his first murders in this mall's parking lot when he shot an interracial couple in broad daylight. Now, unfortunately, Rebecca Bergstrom accepted a ride from Franklin. She told him she had been staying with a friend in Madison and was trying to get to Minneapolis-St. Paul. Franklin told her that he was going to Chicago, but he'd be happy to go out of his way to take her to the Twin Cities. So he was thinking of making a pass at her, but then she told him that she had just returned from Jamaica.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and when he learned that she had dated black men there, he decided that she was guilty of capital crimes and now she deserved to be executed. So after stopping for gas, he drove to a park where he forced her out of his car at gunpoint. Then he shot her in the back, killing her and just leaving her.
Yeah.
Really, no remorse, not much hesitation either.
No, it was almost sport to him. On June 24th, 1980, 7 weeks after the murder of Rebecca Bergstrom, Franklin needed money again. So he put on a dark sweatshirt pulled over a bulletproof vest, a pair of jeans with a .357 Magnum tucked in the front, and another revolver in a pocket. He wore a wig and a nylon stocking over his head and a pair of dark gloves. At about 12:45 in the afternoon, Franklin walked into the front door of the Holly Mill branch of the North Carolina National Bank in Burlington. Once inside, he drew the Magnum from his pants and jumped behind the teller's counter.
Yeah, he left the bank with over $15,000, so he saw this as a big success. After the robbery, Franklin immediately left North Carolina and headed for Virginia. As he drove down the streets of Newport News later that afternoon, He saw a couple of young female hitchhikers and he offered them a ride. He drove them to a friend's house. Now, when they got to the friend's house, one girl got out and went inside, while the other stayed in the car with Franklin. So he made a pass at that girl and groped her. The girl jumped out of the car, though, and ran into the house. So afraid that they might call the police, Franklin drove away quickly because he was fresh off of a bank robbery. So when he left Virginia on June 25th, Franklin was in a really bad mood. The girl who had rejected him had made him very angry. And as he drove out of Richmond, he'd told himself that he would kill the next female he picked up if she turned out to be a race mixer. He despised interracial dating and believed execution was the appropriate punishment for that. Remember, he's a very violent white supremacist.
Yes, he is.
So Franklin picked up Nancy and Vicki in his black Chevy Nova in West Virginia, most likely where the U.S. Highway 219 branches off the interstate and goes north into the Monongahela National Forest, the location of the Rainbow Gathering. Franklin introduced himself as Joe. When Nancy got into the back seat, she complimented him on his cool car. She sat with her and Vicki's belongings, the 2 backpacks, the 2 sleeping bags, the tent, and the set of bongo drums. Vicki got in the front seat, and she noticed a rainbow sticker on the car's dashboard. So she turned to Nancy in the back seat, pointing to the sticker and smiling, because they believed this was a good sign. Isn't that horrible? That just gives me chills.
He probably didn't even put the sticker on there.
I would doubt that, yeah. I would think he didn't.
Was this a car he had stolen, or is this his car?
I'm not really sure, but he did steal cars, so It wouldn't be surprising.
So Franklin had never heard of the Rainbow Gathering. He talked to the 2 women and decided it must be some sort of hippie anti-nuclear event, or hippies taking over the country.
Yeah, probably.
He looked at the map that was drawn on the flyer Vicki showed him, and he agreed to drive Vicki and Nancy up to the festival site. Vicki was wearing lavender pants with a navy blue hoodie over a white top with clouds and a rainbow. Nancy was wearing a red University of Iowa sweatshirt, and under that she wore a flower-patterned cotton t-shirt. If Franklin was thinking about making a pass when he first saw Vicki and Nancy, he soon gave up on that. The ladies were dirty from being several days on the road without really washing, and he didn't like that. And also the young women were too heavy to appeal to Franklin. He really liked petite, skinny women.
Now, when he picked up Nancy and Vicki, Franklin was still thinking about the woman who had rejected and frustrated him the day before in Virginia. He still was planning to kill the next female he picked up, who had violated God's prohibition against race mixing. I say that with quotes. After driving for a short time on US 219, Franklin stopped at the Little General store in Maxwellton to buy gas. Nancy and Vicki went into the store and they talked with the clerk, telling her that they were coming from Arizona. The clerk would remember the 2 young women and their blonde male driver. Nancy and Vicki got back into Franklin's car, exhausted. He made an effort to seem like a really nice guy, though. He turned on the charm. He had this soft-spoken Southern accent. As he drove toward the Monongahela National Forest, Franklin began talking about race. Hiding his own views, he asked Vicki and Nancy their opinions about black people. How did they feel about interracial dating, he asked them. Vicki told him that she had dated black men before, and Nancy said that she hadn't, but she really saw nothing wrong with it. So of course he decided to kill them both. And then he felt even more justified in killing them when Vicki told him that she was a communist. Vicki was into the commune lifestyle, so he may have misinterpreted that.
I'm sure he did. So as they rode on, Vicki sat facing Franklin with her back resting against the car's door. Nancy sat sideways in the back seat with one bare left foot tucked up under her. And beneath his calm, Franklin was in a rage. He was just absolutely furious at these 2 race-mixing women, communists, in fact, in his car. About 45 minutes after he had left the Little General store, Franklin saw that he was approaching Droop Mountain, which was a Civil War memorial park. So Franklin pulled into the park, telling Nancy and Vicki that he had some marijuana and wanted to find a remote spot where he could share a joint with them. And according to him, they readily agreed with that plan. I'm not so sure.
No, we're not sure at all.
Because this is all testimony from Franklin.
It is. It's from interviews done with him later on. Franklin drove Droop Mountain Park, and after a while he drove off of Droop Mountain and onto another smaller mountain, and that was Briery Knob. The pavement stopped and the road turned to dirt. And then he didn't have to drive much further before the road became nothing more than a dirt trail. On Briery Knob, Vicki asked Franklin to stop the car so she could pee. So this was a perfect setup for the killing, because he wanted to kill the girls outside of his car. He didn't want to fire his .44 caliber pistol inside the car, because it would be extremely loud, and he also didn't want to clean up a mess inside of the vehicle.
Yeah, I think that's probably most deterrent.
Probably.
Not the loudness. He'd have to actually clean things up.
Absolutely. So while the women were at the side of the road with their backs to him, Franklin reached under his seat and grabbed his pistol. So this was really his golden opportunity. But he said that he stood frozen in place and the opportunity passed. So he said something like he had to get psyched up to do this and he wasn't quite ready yet. So as the girls finished up on the side of the road, Franklin got back into the car, and Vicki and Nancy didn't see the pistol that he had put under his seat as he got back into the car. By this time, Nancy and Vicki may have started to become a bit worried, though. He'd been driving down an isolated trail for miles. Maybe they started to ask him questions. But according to him, they did remain calm. Of course, Vicki and Nancy wouldn't live to tell us about that day. So these details are based on what Franklin has said in interviews after he was incarcerated. So you have to take this all with a grain of salt.
Or with some skepticism.
Yes. After driving for another mile or two, Franklin had arrived at the place where he would kill them. He said that voices in his head were talking to him, the same voices he had heard when his father was beating him as a child. Following the same M.O. he had used with Rebecca Bergstrom, Franklin abruptly stopped the car, reached under the seat, pulled out the .44, and ordered the two hitchhikers to get out. He told them he was going to rape them, and when he pointed his pistol at them and demanded that they get out of the car, neither of them moved. Now, there was nowhere for them to run to. Nobody would hear them scream. So, as she looked at the gun he was holding in his hand, Vicki likely realized that pleading with this guy wasn't going to work. When he ordered her to get out of the car, she shook her head and said no. So Franklin just shot Vicki in the chest right then and there. Nancy in the back seat was trapped. So Franklin shot at Nancy, but he missed the first time. Then he turned back to Vicki and shot her again in the chest. Then Franklin got out of his car, and leaning into the vehicle through the driver's side window, he pointed his pistol once again at Nancy. Nancy held up an arm in a defensive position in front of her face. Franklin shot her 3 times. Then he grabbed Vicki's sweatshirt and dragged her out of the car to an open field. Then he ran back for Nancy, dragging her out of the car and leaving her beside Vicki. Now he had no idea where he was or if anyone had heard the gunshots, so he left the women's belongings in the back seat. Probably forgot about them. Got back into his car and drove off towards the highway. Now, after he left Nancy and Vicki's bodies lying in that field on Briery Knob, Franklin basically retraced his steps. He traveled west until he could get back onto Interstate 64, leading him into Charleston, and after that, Lexington, Kentucky. As he drove toward Charleston, Franklin decided that he needed to dispose of the victim's belongings, the gun, and his car, the Chevy Nova.
After he had driven a while on West Virginia Route 60, Franklin found a trash dump to get rid of Vicki and Nancy's things. So he parked and unloaded everything from his back seat, hiding it under some bushes. Then he got back into the Nova and wiped it down with a rag. As he was going over the back seat, he found a piece of bone lying on the panel between the back seat and the rear window. He picked up a piece of Nancy's skull and threw it out the window. He got out and walked around the car looking for bullet holes. He saw that the front passenger side door and a rear panel were dented, but no bullets had gone through the metal. So he continued on his way to Kentucky. He drove into Lexington, got himself a hotel room as a treat, He'd been sleeping in his car for days.
Yeah, Franklin sawed apart the pistol he had used in his last 3 murders. He couldn't get rid of the Nova just yet, so he had to drive it for a few more days. Once in Lexington, Franklin responded to a classified ad in a newspaper offering a 1976 Chevy Camaro for sale. He had always wanted a Camaro, so he met with the seller and took the car for a test drive. He liked the Camaro and paid cash for it. To get rid of the Nova, he drove it down towards Nashville, where he abandoned it. He wrecked the car by driving it into a tree, removed the Indiana license plate, and walked away. Then he found a Greyhound station where he got on a bus that took him back to Lexington, where he had left his Camaro. West Virginia law enforcement spent a lot of time and effort trying to identify the victims, who were now known as the Rainbow Girls. State troopers and Pocahontas Sheriff's deputies went to the Rainbow Gathering, where they showed post-mortem photos of the 2 victims. Many said that the girls looked familiar, but no one could remember seeing them at the gathering.
Well, because they never got there.
Exactly. A couple of drawings published in local papers didn't get any immediate responses either. Robert Elkire called the Rainbow family's headquarters in Oregon, hoping to find someone who knew the victims. Though no one from the Rainbow family could remember seeing the girls, several people in Pocahontas and the surrounding counties could. But unfortunately, most of these accounts led nowhere.
Well, again, this is a big gathering. There's going to be thousands of people there.
Oh, yeah, I think like 20,000.
Yeah, so how can you possibly remember people you've met?
Well, that's true. But one theory was that a local person had killed the 2 girls because he was angry about the gathering coming to his neighborhood. You know, one of those anti-hippie types.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, so then the state police learned that Roberta Griffith, a cashier at the Little General Store in Maxwellton, had reported to the local police that she had seen the Rainbow Girls at the store. On Tuesday, July 1st, Trooper Elkire took her statement. She reported that she saw the 2 victims in the store where she worked on June 25th, between 5:30 and 6 p.m. One of the girls had told her that she and her companion were from Arizona, and she had seen the girls get into a black Chevy Nova driven by a blonde young man she had never seen before. She said that the man had purchased $6 worth of gas, and she described him as tall and thin, not a hippie, with blonde hair. No glasses, no beard or mustache. She said that there might have been duffel bags in the back seat of the car, but when they left, the Nova headed north on US 219.
And then a local man, John Blake, also came forward to say that he had seen the 2 victims at the Little General Store. He said he saw the women get into a 1969 to 71 black Chevy Nova about 6 p.m. on June 25th. He thought he had seen 2 males in the car. The driver, who he had seen outside the car, was tall and thin. He had short, cropped, light-colored hair and is clean-shaven. Blake also remembered that the Nova headed north on US 219. So a bolo, be on the lookout, was sent out for the black Chevy Nova. Griffith, the clerk, met with a state police tech and put together a composite sketch of the man she had seen at the Little General Store. And it did resemble Joseph Paul Franklin.
Yeah, and it didn't take long for the bolo to get results. The next day, state troopers stopped Ronnie Biggs, a resident of Slatty Fork. He was driving a blue Chevy Nova, but Biggs didn't have registration papers for the car. Troopers thought they saw bloodstains in the car, too. They looked at the tires and thought that they partially fit the suspect vehicle. So the car was impounded. Bloodstains found in Ronnie Biggs' car were human, but they didn't match the Rainbow Girls. His photo was shown to Roberta Griffith at the Little General Store, and she told police that Biggs was not the man she had seen. So Biggs' car was released from the impound lot, and he was cleared as a suspect. So the conclusion of law enforcement agents in Pocahontas County was that the killer was probably a local resident. Most people thought that the killer was a local who knew exactly where he was going and was familiar with the site where he had left the bodies, because many men living in the area nearby sometimes went there to hunt. But it would turn out to be a big mistake to focus on local men exclusively.
Right. Yeah, this is one of those nightmares. You have a serial killer who is a drifter.
Exactly. And, how often does that happen? It does seem unlikely.
Yes, it does. But it just makes it more difficult to try to identify who that person is.
Oh, absolutely. Robert Must, who had found the bodies, told police that he sometimes parked his car near his cabin, right in the middle of Briery Road, and he'd leave it there for hours, knowing that it wouldn't be in anyone's way. So that's how deserted that area normally was. In August, 3 possible suspects were identified. Palmer Atkinson was a white male, date of birth 3/15/56, height 5'7", weight 170, who was in the area where the girls were found. He also had knowledge of the area, and he had been a suspect in the case of 2 missing persons before. Then there was Arnold Cutlip, a white male, date of birth 11/25/37, height 6'3", weight 225, who lived in the house nearest to the field where the victims' bodies were found. He was known to be in the area at the time of the murders, and he was believed to be capable of committing acts of murder. He also seemed to know more than he was saying.
And then Bruce Chapman, who was a white male, date of birth 1946, height 5'5", weight 205. This guy had a long history of being a flasher, and he did have a criminal record. He could have been in the area where the girls were found, even though he was on a work release program from the Pocahontas County Jail. But it's interesting, he comes forward with 3 possible suspects, and they all have records that would suggest they were capable of doing this.
They do, but they're mostly just looking at local guys who are not good guys, right? That have a criminal record and have had a history of being violent.
Right.
Yeah. Palmer Atkinson was well known to the Pocahontas County Sheriff's Department as a real troublemaker, and his name would come up frequently in the Rainbow murder investigation. Arnold Cutlip just had the misfortune to live near the site where the bodies were found. He earned his living doing odd jobs, mainly cutting and hauling timber, but Cutlip had been convicted of burglary as a young man, but still that was more than 20 years earlier.
So Kathy Santomero had planned to meet her sister Nancy at the Rainbow Gathering. She and her friends arrived in West Virginia in late June. Once at the Rainbow Camp, she immediately tried to find her sister. But with thousands of people there, she realized that finding Nancy wouldn't be as simple as she had imagined. But she did find a group of friends who knew her sister. They hadn't seen her at the camp. But Kathy wasn't worried. She believed that her little sister would show up. Kathy hadn't been at the Rainbow site for very long when she heard the news about 2 young women who had been murdered nearby on June 25th. Everyone thought that the 2 murdered women were Native American, however, because the police had said that one of the women wore her hair in braids.
Yeah, what they would call Indian style. After a couple of days went by and Kathy still couldn't find her sister, she did begin to worry. She asked a friend if one of the victims could have been Nancy, but then her friend kind of poo-pooed it and told her, "Oh my God, that's ridiculous." So Kathy accepted that answer and put the thought out of her mind for a while. On July 5th, after spending about a week at the Rainbow Gathering, Kathy traveled back to New York with her friends. She just thought Nancy had blown the whole thing off and probably found something better to do.
Because that would not be unheard of from her.
No, but she was pretty reliable as far as showing up when she said she would. So once Kathy got home, she was sure she'd get a call from Nancy. And as she was putting her belongings into the back of her friend's pickup truck, someone tossed a copy of a local newspaper into the back as well. So Kathy waited for her sister to call. She was working that summer in the town where she attended college, and one day after work, a day or 2 after she had returned to New York, she went into town to visit some friends. So they were sitting on the porch of the house, and someone was reading that West Virginia paper that had been thrown into the truck. It was the issue with the composite drawing of the women who had been murdered. When friends saw the drawings, they thought that one of the victims really did look like Nancy. So they showed the paper to Kathy, but Kathy wasn't ready to admit that that could be her sister. She did feel unsettled, though. It had been almost 2 weeks since anyone had heard from Nancy, and it really wasn't like her to make plans and then break them without giving any explanation. So Teeter McCann had attended the Rainbow Gathering with Kathy Santomero and some other friends. He looked at the sketch in the paper that was being passed around, and he felt sure that one of the girls was Nancy Santomero. He went ahead on his own then, and he called the West Virginia State Police. This was on Wednesday, July 9th, and a short time after his call, Robert Elkire called Kathy Santomero. He described the victim, who her friend believed was her sister, and Kathy finally had to admit that the victim likely was her sister Nancy.
So the police asked Kathy to come and identify her sister's body. A friend lent her a car, and another friend loaned her some money. But she didn't tell her parents anything, figuring if it wasn't Nancy, she didn't want to upset them for nothing. So she drove to West Virginia with a female friend. On July 10th, Kathy and her friend were taken into a mortuary where someone removed the cover from the face of a dead body. Kathy stared at the disfigured face of a young woman and said she didn't recognize her. But her friend knew Nancy and she insisted that it was her. Then Kathy recognized a silver bracelet on the left arm, and this was a bracelet that Kathy had made for Nancy as a gift. When she saw that bracelet, she had to admit that Nancy was dead.
Yeah, so Kathy positively identified the body of her sister. She told the authorities that the other body she had been shown was probably Vicki Durian from Wellman, Iowa. Kathy also told the police that Nancy and Vicki had been traveling with another woman whom she knew only as Liz. So Robert Elkire contacted the authorities in Iowa about the second body that Kathy had identified as Vicki Durian. Lieutenant Jack Killian of the Department of Public Safety told Elkire that he personally knew the Durian family, so he would contact them and get some information. Vicki's father, Howard Durian, came to West Virginia the next day, July 11th. He identified the body of his daughter and told police that she had been traveling with a young woman named Liz Jondro, who was from Vermont. On Saturday, July 12th, the names of the murder victims were released to the media. 18 days after their deaths, the Rainbow Girls had finally been identified. But where was the third Rainbow Girl, Liz Jondro?
On Monday, July 14th, Liz Jondro was at her mother's house in Connecticut when she received a call from a friend in Oregon. Relieved to find out that she was alive and well, the friend told her the terrible news about Vicki and Nancy. And the next day, Liz called a newspaper in Marlinton, West Virginia, to try and find out more about the fate of her friends. Someone at the Pocahontas Times surprised her by telling her that she had been the subject of a statewide search. Some people, like her friend in Oregon, had thought that she had been the third Rainbow Girl, and that she may also have been killed. Liz left her phone number with the paper, and on Wednesday, July 16th, Corporal Gary Hott called Liz. She answered his questions the best she could, but she couldn't remember seeing the Nova or its driver who picked up Nancy and Vicki.
Now, during her interview with Hott, Liz said that the date she left her friends was June 25th. The next day, she told a reporter that she had separated from her friends on June 24th. So the discrepancy between these two dates could cause issues in the investigation. But no progress was being made anyway. Police in West Virginia had no idea that there was a serial killer traveling the country's highways and targeting race mixers. They were convinced that the killer was a local man, likely a redneck type, who'd been looking for a good time with the hippie girls on their way to the Rainbow Gathering. The police had done extensive searching for a black Chevy Nova, but the car had been abandoned out of state. So from the very start of the investigation, even though there was no evidence of a sexual assault, police were really leaning into a sexual motive as the cause of these killings. Not long after the murders, police questioned two suspects, Palmer Atkinson, a local man known for frequent run-ins with the law, and he would brag about his criminal adventures. And sometimes after a few drinks, Atkinson would say that he had left plenty of bodies up on Briary Knob. But when police interviewed him about the two bodies they had found there, he denied this. He told them that he had spent the afternoon and the evening of June 25th with his girlfriend. Christine Cook confirmed to police that she had been with Atkinson most of the afternoon and early evening on the day of the murders. Leads of little or no value came in as the investigation continued.
In August 1980, Joseph Paul Franklin was in Salt Lake City. He was continuing his mission of killing. Someone had told him that black men were pimping out white girls in Liberty Park. Franklin wanted to kill a black pimp for a very long time. So on the night of August 28th, Franklin was cruising the streets of Liberty Park, hoping to make this fantasy a reality.
Yeah, so that's like a life goal for him. Isn't that sick?
Yeah, like a bucket list.
Terrible.
Things weren't going his way, however. He didn't see any black pimps in the park. And as he drove through the park, he saw two young black men with two teenage white girls. He later said, "It was the worst case of race mixing I had ever seen." He followed the four young people and watched as they jogged toward one of the park's exits.
Yeah, he's such a sicko.
Jeez.
As the four headed out of the park, Franklin sped up. He drove into a vacant lot. He thought the joggers would run past the lot after they left the park, and he was right about that. His first shot hit David Martin, 18, in his leg. The teen staggered and fell to the ground. Now, at first his friends thought he was joking around. As Theodore Fields, 20, stood over Martin, another shot hit Fields. He was shot in the back. Franklin continued to fire more rapid shots and hit the teen males again. So as Ted Fields was dying, he whispered to the two girls they'd been with that they should run away. So all that, and he still thought about the girl and their safety.
So he aimed his gun at one of the girls who was running toward him, and just as he was about to pull the trigger, a light came on in a nearby house. He looked up, and there was a kid staring right at him. So Franklin tossed his gun into the trunk of his car and took off. A 12-year-old young lady named Carrie, who had been standing at the window of a friend's house and looking down at Franklin, had saved the girl's life. Police in Salt Lake City couldn't imagine who had gunned down two young men, both employed, both without any criminal history, as they jogged down a public street.
Well, no, it was really freaky. In 1980, 34-year-old Jacob Beard was living in Hillsboro, West Virginia. He worked as a mechanic servicing equipment for Greenbrier tractor sales. He used to drive around Briery Knob all the time. And every time he passed by the area, he would think about the two girls who had been murdered there. This was just a few miles from his house, and Beard said that it bothered him a lot. Beard believed that the Pocahontas County Sheriff's Department was responsible for the investigation, and he didn't know that the state police were involved as well. He had heard that Bill Hall, a deputy in the sheriff's department, was asking people in Pocahontas about the murders. So that gave Beard the incorrect idea that Hall was in charge of the investigation. And Bill Hall had graduated from Hillsboro High School 1 year after Beard, and the two had been friends. Beard liked Hall, but he didn't think he was a good police officer. Beard believed that Hall wasn't smart enough. In fact, according to Beard, most of the Pocahontas deputies were bumpkins and not bright enough to be running an investigation. So in 1982, after 2 years without any progress being made in the Rainbow Girls case, Beard had decided that if it were to ever be solved, the FBI would have to take over the case. Maybe, Beard thought, somebody should say something to the girls' families. And he considered this quite a bit for quite a while, thinking he could call the girls' fathers, give his condolences, and warn them that the investigation might not be going as it should. But he really didn't consider that this was going to get a lot of attention on him.
Yeah, I'm not sure what his motive is for this either.
Well, he said he was just trying to help and wanted to tell the fathers. This is what he said. He said he wanted to help and he felt bad about it.
Sure.
But that's not how the police saw it.
I wouldn't.
No, it did make him look suspicious.
So on the night of Friday, July 2nd, 1982, Beard was at home, but he couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept going back to the Rainbow murders. Well, maybe, he thought, it would be a good idea to call the fathers of the two victims. He had been wanting to tell them about how sorry he was about what had happened to their daughters, and he wanted to encourage them to try to get the FBI to take over the case. So about 11 o'clock in the evening, Beard called Howard Durian in Iowa. He'd had a few drinks, but he wasn't drunk. He knew it was late, so he thought he'd call Howard Durian in Iowa. The time zone was an hour earlier, so that would be better for him. He dialed information for the number. Howard answered on the first ring, and Beard told Howard Durian that with 2 daughters of his own, he could appreciate his loss and the pain that he had suffered. He talked about how deeply offended he was that the killings had happened in the county that he had grown up in. He told Durian that if the case would ever be solved, the FBI would have to do it. Howard Durian thanked him for his concern and asked for his name. But Beard told him he would rather remain anonymous because he didn't know enough to get involved in the case.
Yeah, and that just made him look more suspicious, although Howard Durian really wasn't suspicious of him. But he had been feeling frustrated that no progress had been made in solving his daughter's murder. And although Beard had said nothing to make him suspicious at all, really, he decided it was a good idea to report the call to the West Virginia State Police the next day, which is perfectly reasonable. At the time Beard was talking to Howard Durian, Joseph Paul Franklin had been in prison now for almost 2 years. His luck had finally run out on September 25th, 1980, in Florence, Kentucky. It was about 2 a.m. on the 25th when he was awakened by a police car radios outside of his motel room and flashing blue lights outside of his window. Franklin called the front desk to complain about the noise and to ask why so many police were in the parking lot because it had to make him at least a little nervous. But there was a Florence police officer in the office who overheard Franklin. That morning, the police had been there to arrest an armed robber. The officer who had overheard Franklin's call thought he might be in on it. He might be a person of interest as well. So he ran the plates on the Camaro parked outside of Franklin's room, and it came back as a stolen vehicle. Franklin was hauled out of the motel and taken to jail. After he was interrogated for hours, police made the mistake of leaving him alone in an office area for a couple of minutes, and he jumped out of a window and escaped. So Franklin was free for a little more than a month after that, but Florence police had kept his guns and his car. So on October 28, 1980, FBI agents followed up on a tip, and they waited for Franklin when he walked out of a blood bank in Lakeland, Florida. 2 agents approached Franklin and asked him for his ID. So what he did was he showed them a wallet-sized high school diploma and told them his name was Thomas Alvin Bonert. And the agents looked at his forearm and saw his Grim Reaper tattoo. So they told him that they had reason to believe that his name was really Joseph Paul Franklin. They took him down to the Lakeland police station so they could verify his identity. So just 6 months after his arrest in Florida, Franklin was convicted of killing those 2 young men who'd been jogging, Ted Fields and David Martin. He was convicted in federal court in Salt Lake City. Then 8 months after those federal civil rights violation convictions, Franklin was convicted in a Utah state court for killing the 2 young men. He was then sent to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, to serve 2 consecutive federal life sentences. Franklin's robbery and murder spree had lasted a total of 39 months, and during those months, he had killed 22 people and wounded 11, according to Franklin. He had planted bombs which destroyed a synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee, damaged a nightclub in Mississippi, and partially destroyed the home of the director of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. At the time he was on trial in Salt Lake City in 1981, law enforcement only knew about some of Franklin's other crimes. Police in Georgia believed that Franklin was responsible for shooting Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flint on March 6, 1978. The Justice Department was certain that Franklin had shot and almost killed civil rights leader Vernon Jordan in Fort Wayne, Indiana on May 28, 1980. Police in Cincinnati were sure that Franklin had shot teenagers Darrell Lane and Dante Evans Brown on June 8, 1980. The problem that all of these agencies had in common, though, was that none of them could prove that Franklin was guilty of the crimes. In 1982, only Franklin himself had any idea that he had killed Nancy Santomero and Vicki Durian in West Virginia on June 25, 1980.
So 6 weeks after he talked to Howard Durian, Jake Beard was driving a tractor cutting hay. On his way home, he stopped to talk to a friend, and while they were talking, Pocahontas Sheriff's Deputy Bill Hall drove up and stopped beside him. The deputy told Beard that a couple of state police officers in Marlinton wanted to talk to him. Surprised, Beard followed him to the state police headquarters in Marlinton. He was taken into a room where several state troopers were waiting for him. Beard stood in the room, waiting to hear why he was there. But it was the telephone call he had made to Iowa, of course.
Well, of
Why
course.
else?
Yeah. So Elkhire asked Beard why he'd called Howard Durian. He also asked about his whereabouts on June 25, 1980. Beard said that he told Elkhire that the only Chevy Nova he knew of in the area was parked in the yard of a man in Hillsboro, but that car was blue, not black. Beard said that local people had done the killing, and Beard later explained that he was just repeating what he had heard around town, basically rumors. So sometime in July, after the Rainbow Gathering, Beard had been called by a local business owner who asked if he could tow a van which had broken down in front of her store. Beard responded and met David Berman, the van's owner, and an Asian female who introduced herself as Wing Bo. Berman told Beard that he had been at the Rainbow event and had noticed some hostility from the local citizens. Both told Beard that a local man had probably killed the girls. David Berman was later located, and he confirmed the details about his meeting with Beard. Beard told Trooper Elkhire that he had attended a school board meeting in Marlinton on the evening of June 25, 1980. He had shown up early, around 7 p.m., and he named several witnesses who could verify that he was at that meeting at that time. But still, he wasn't cleared as a person of interest. The state medical examiner had estimated that the victims were killed around 7 p.m., so if Beard's alibi checked out, it really wasn't possible for him to have killed the Rainbow Girls. Elkhire asked Beard if he would take a polygraph, and Beard agreed to take the test. The test concluded. Response: Beard not present when Rainbow victims killed. Result: truth. Beard did not shoot the victims. Result: truth. But then Beard agreed to a second test, and in the second test, similar questions had inconclusive results. After several hours talking with the state police, Beard was thanked for cooperating and they let him go. He left feeling like he wasn't a suspect. The police, he thought, just needed to know why he had made that telephone call to Iowa. He hadn't even been asked to sign a statement. Beard's alibi seemed to check out, but still he wasn't eliminated as a suspect. So as Elkhire put it, he was put on the back burner.
During their second meeting with Jake Beard, Elkhire asked Beard about another murder case. The body of Ralph Combs, a local guy, had been found on Briery Knob back in February, months before the Rainbow murders occurred. Beard told Elkhire that he didn't know Combs, and that he hadn't heard anything about the murder. He did know Barbara Combs, the victim's wife, who had been a high school classmate of his. Elkhire then brought up Arnold Cutlip. Beard said that Cutlip had cut some timber on his father's land a couple times, and that he had spoken to him once. That was all he knew about Cutlip. Still, Elkhire believed that at some point, somebody, maybe Jake Beard, would give him the information he needed to solve the Rainbow Girl murder case. And before they parted this time, Elkhire asked Beard to continue to ask around town about the murders and to keep his eyes and ears open for any tips.
So part of the problem here is that the people living in this area, which is very rural West Virginia, aren't very sophisticated about this kind of thing, and they kept coming in without an attorney. And they pretty much believed everything the police told them. And I think some of the police took advantage of that. In early 1983, Elkhire called Beard and asked him to come in for another talk. So Beard went in, thinking Elkhire would ask him what he had heard about the Rainbow murders since they last talked. But he was mistaken because Elkhire still suspected that Beard was withholding some information. And now he was more determined than ever to get Beard to tell him everything he knew. This has been going on a while, and they're frustrated and want to solve this. When Beard walked into Elkhire's office, it was February 3rd. Elkhire told him that the county prosecuting attorney wanted to talk to him as well. So the two men went across the street to Stephen Hunter's office, which was in the courthouse. Hunter, his assistant, and attorney David Arrington were waiting there for them. Hunter asked Beard if he could now remember anything about the case that he had forgotten to tell the police earlier. He was told that he should speak freely because an immunity agreement had already been worked up for him. So that's very strange.
They're trying to get him to talk, I think.
I think so.
Beard said that there was something he could tell them that he hadn't mentioned before. And that was on the afternoon of June 25th, 1980. He finished the field work he had done for Greenbrier tractor sales. He's driving home on Highway 219 when he drove past Droop Mountain State Park. Then he saw 2 cars parked near the entrance. One belonged to Barbara Combs. Beard hadn't seen anyone in or around her car, but standing beside the other car, Beard recognized 2 men. They were Palmer Atkinson and Bill McCoy, and sitting in the front seat of the car they were standing beside was Christine Cook, Atkinson's girlfriend. Beard recognized the car as belonging to Cook. Beard said he didn't know Palmer Atkinson, but he knew of Palmer Atkinson. So that's like, I don't personally know him, but I've heard stories about him.
Well, or he's seen him around town, but has no relationship with him, is the way I would see it. But he did have a reputation around town as a troublemaker, so most people had at least heard of him. Bill McCoy had been on a crew that cut lumber on Beard's dad's farm, so Beard said that he knew him on sight, but he'd never spoken with him. Now, Beard thought he saw 2 women that day, he said, sitting in the back of Cook's car. After just a quick glimpse, Beard really couldn't be sure if they were women, though. They probably were, he said, because they had long hair worn in a female style, whatever that means. But I think there's just a lot of pressure on him to give information to the point where he might kind of be making stuff up just to please them. And that happens. We've heard of that before.
Yeah, although it could also be that he liked being in the limelight.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the limelight, but he may have liked the attention, sure. I don't know if sitting with the attorneys and policemen would be counting as limelight, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's attention. I get what you're saying, yes. But Beard had never before mentioned seeing anyone on Droop Mountain because of Barbara Combs, he told the prosecutor. He said he hadn't mentioned it before because he didn't want to get her involved in anything to do with the murders. Seeing 2 women with a prime suspect in the Rainbow murders on Droop Mountain at about 5:30 p.m. on June 25, 1980, was a real game changer. So Hunter told Beard that he needed him to continue helping them in the investigation. He told Beard that he would write up an immunity agreement to protect him.
Yeah.
But we've heard before where people go in and they think they're helping in the investigation, but really they're the prime suspect.
Yeah.
And why would he need an immunity agreement? That's very strange.
So Beard told Hunter that he wasn't sure he had anything else to contribute to the investigation, but he would be happy to help in any way he could. He wasn't really concerned about getting an immunity agreement. What he was concerned about was a recent incident where an ex-girlfriend accused him of killing her 2 pets, and he had been charged with animal cruelty. He denied having anything to do with it. But in return for Beard's further cooperation, Hunter said he was willing to grant a continuance on his animal cruelty charges.
Yeah, and I think Beard interpreted this statement as a hint that the charges would just go away. But of course there was a hitch. Before a continuance could be granted or an immunity agreement signed, Hunter said Beard would have to pass a polygraph test to prove that he wasn't the trigger man in the Rainbow murders. So Beard agreed with that. He took the test, and the polygrapher noted the results. No direct involvement with Rainbow murders. Truth. Beard then signed the immunity agreement that Hunter had prepared. Beard left that night of February 3rd, feeling very uneasy, though. He hadn't felt like a suspect at all until that immunity agreement was presented to him.
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
He hadn't done anything wrong, so he didn't understand why immunity was needed. And Beard's fears would turn out to be very justified. Documents from that interview suggested that Beard was not considered to be the trigger man, but that he was considered to have had some involvement in the Rainbow Girl murders. Because of her relationship with Palmer Atkinson, police had already talked to Christine Cook twice. And on July 4th, 1980, Cook had told a state trooper that she and Atkinson had seen Arnold Cutlip on the afternoon of June 25th, 1980. During the course of the day, Cook said, she parted from Atkinson, but then she met up with him again at Droop Mountain sometime after 4 p.m. Then the couple left the park to go get a fish sandwich. Cook said she was sure she wasn't on Droop Mountain at 5 p.m. And then by the fall of 1982, Cook wasn't even seeing Atkinson anymore. In her second interview with the state police on September 8, 1982, Cook said she believed Atkinson had killed the Rainbow Girls. In fact, Cook claimed that he had beaten and threatened her several times when she refused to have sex with him. So she said Atkinson was capable of murder.
So in their summary of Cook's interview from September 8, 1982, police noted that Cook had told them that Atkinson and Jake Beard were friends. Cook would later admit that at this time, she didn't have any idea who Jake Beard was. Where had she heard his name? And why she thought he was friends with her boyfriend? She did not say. So 5 months later, on February 7, 1983, 4 days after Beard told the prosecutor about seeing Christine Cook on Droop Mountain the day of the murders, state police talked to her again. After sharing Beard's statement with her, Cook changed hers. She said that she might have been on Droop Mountain after 5 o'clock on June 25, 1980. And if she was on the mountain, she was with Atkinson and Bill McCoy. But she'd seen 2 other men that day, Richie Fowler and Gerald Brown. But no, she said, there had not been any women in her car, and she had not seen any women that day on Droop Mountain.
Yeah, so Cook agreed to take a polygraph. The report read that she showed some deception on whether she knew who killed Vicki and Nancy, but that she had been truthful when she said that they had not been in her car. When asked if she was there when they were killed, she had also showed some deception. As Jake Beard and Christine Cook were talking to the state police in February of 1983, Palmer Atkinson and Bill McCoy had already been arrested, but they had been arrested for the 1980 murder of Ralph Combs. Then each man claimed the other had been hired by Barbara Combs to kill her husband. Barbara, they said, wanted to collect on an insurance policy that she had taken out on Ralph. So that's a little interesting side note, I guess.
It sure is. You never know what you can dig up when you do a little questioning.
That's right. So on September 4th, 1982, while being held in the Pocahontas County Jail, Atkinson talked to the police about the Rainbow murders. Again, he said that he sold a truck to Arnie Cutlip on June 25, 1980, and that he had been with Christine Cook most of that day. He reminded the police of his other alibi, which he had mentioned when he was questioned about the murders back in 1980. Back on August 15, 1980, it had been confirmed that a woman named Rhonda had been with Atkinson on June 25th at another location at about 6 p.m. So after his September 4th interview, Atkinson agreed to take a polygraph. These police are like polygraph crazy, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you know, that can just be used as a tool. We don't know if those results were accurate at all. How many times will they tell someone it was inconclusive or you're lying when that's really not the case? It's just a tool to get a confession.
Yeah, right.
So police noted that the test results indicated Atkinson did kill Ralph Combs, and he was involved with the Rainbow murders too. West Virginia State Police were now convinced that they were making progress in this case, and Alkire was convinced that there was more information to get from the locals. Investigators would keep the pressure up until something new came out, and someone in Pocahontas County would talk, and the Rainbow case would be solved. So at this point, the police really feel confident that some locals killed Nancy and Vicki.
They're still pursuing that angle. Yeah.
Yeah, they were really kind of stuck on it.
Jake Beard called the state police office on Sunday, February 6, 1983, and asked to speak to Alkire. The officer who answered the call said that he immediately called Alkire at his home and told him about Beard's call. Alkire immediately called Beard back, and then Alkire called the officer afterwards, and he said that Mr. Beard had told him that Arnie Cutlip and Palmer Atkinson had run a girl through a corn chopper at his farm back in September 1980. So Alkire made arrangements for Beard to come back to be interviewed again that evening.
Because that was a big thing to say, right? Holy shit.
Yeah, well, it's a local guy, right?
It is.
But it seems like it took him a long way around the barn to get there.
Right. Exactly. Well, when Beard arrived at the state police office that Sunday night, he was read his Miranda rights. And after he talked with Elkhire, Beard signed a statement, which read, "It was in the first part of September 1980. I was at my shop working on my chopper. That is what I used to chop up silage. Arnie Cutlip and Palmer Atkinson drove up in Arnie's green Chevrolet pickup truck, and Arnie was driving. They got out of the truck. Arnie had been drinking. I couldn't smell anything on Palmer. I had oiled the chopper, and it was sitting there idling. Arnie was looking for Gerald Brown. I told him Gerald was not there. Then Palmer started to walk around the wagon and tripped over the tongue. When he got up, he looked into the chopper that was running, and he said, 'Arnie, I think there's the answer to our problem.' Palmer then went to the back of Arnie's truck and lifted a body out of it. The body had a dark gray smock wrapped around it. And then he started the body through the chopper, feet first. It went through up to the body, and the garment got caught. Palmer unhooked the garment, and the body went the rest of the way through. I said something like, 'Who the hell was that?' And Arnie said, 'That crazy cocksucker killed her.' Palmer just stood there and watched. He was fascinated watching that thing turn. Arnie said something like, 'You'd better forget what you saw,' or something like that. Arnie then grabbed Buddy and put him back in the truck. They left then, and they have not said another word to me about this." So what do you think of this statement?
Well, we have the advantage of hindsight, don't we?
We do, but even without that...
This just doesn't feel right.
And who would this have been?
Right.
Because the Rainbow Girls' bodies had been found.
Yep.
They hadn't been put through a chopper. But Beard went on to describe the body of a white female about 90 pounds and under 5 feet tall. So he said that she looked like she was in her 20s, and she had dark, grimy-looking hair and some kind of a wound on her right arm between her elbow and shoulder that had scabbed over. So of course it was a crazy story, but one that police still had to follow up on. According to their report, a teletype was sent out at 11:30 that night requesting any information on a missing female between 20 and 30 years of age that was reported missing between June and September of 1980. Now there were 2 hits. Beard couldn't identify either as the chopped-up girl. Then Beard's farm was searched for any evidence of this. Because think how messy that would be. We've seen Fargo. We know how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, there would have been blood and human parts flying everywhere. But his corn chopper had been sold. Still, though, Beard had the chute attachment on his property. So it was scraped, and the scrapings were sent to the Criminal Identification Bureau lab. Results were negative for any human blood or any remains. Still, they went ahead and questioned Cutlip, who agreed to take a polygraph. The results of his polygraph indicated that he had knowledge of the crime. So a judge ruled that there was probable cause for Cutlip's arrest for killing a third Rainbow Girl and running her through the chopper. And believe it or not, he was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder for this. He was taken into custody. The next day, Cutlip admitted to having been on Beard's farm at some point when he was working cutting lumber for Gerald Brown. Then, without an attorney there, he agreed to take another polygraph. And again, their opinion was that he wasn't telling the truth.
On March 3rd, 1983, Arnie Cutlip had a preliminary hearing. Jake Beard was there, and Beard testified against Cutlip, telling the corn chopper story. So Cutlip stayed in jail, unable to post the $50,000 bond.
And this is all just based on a story by Beard, which doesn't even really make sense.
It truly doesn't. 2 months later, on May 7th, 1983, a sergeant from the West Virginia State Police Criminal Identification Bureau sent a letter to state police investigators. The letter stated that no blood, hair, tissue, or bone was found in the corn chopper scrapings submitted by Alkire on March 14th, 1983. Well, that shoots a few holes in things. On June 15th, 1983, after spending about 4 months in jail, Arnie Cutlip was finally released. A report on January 21st, 1984, indicated that there was no physical evidence that a crime was committed. No victim had ever been identified. The only evidence was the statement from Jake Beard. No charges were ever filed against Atkinson related to the corn chopper incident.
So, what was Jake Beard's explanation for making up this crazy chopper story? The police said that it was to throw them off track from solving the 2 Rainbow Girl murders, but Jake Beard had a different explanation. He claimed that he had a lot on his mind because his father had recently died, and he just wanted the police to stop bothering him. He had told them everything he knew, and he didn't know how he could be of any more help. So that kind of backs up my idea that he was just trying to help, and he felt like he needed to offer them something, even when he didn't have anything. Also, he felt obligated to do whatever they asked of him. So according to Beard, it was Elkire who repeatedly contacted him on February 6th. He had only called the state police headquarters that day because he was returning a call from Elkire. So during an earlier conversation, Elkire had mentioned talking to Gerald Brown, and he said that Brown had told him that he'd never find any bodies in Pocahontas because they'd chop 'em all up. Elkire then had asked Beard how somebody could do that, like he was joking, and Beard had answered, "Well, I guess you could use a corn chopper." So really, that's where this corn chopper story had been born. It was really Elkire's excuse to bring Cutlip in. He had wanted to put pressure on him to get him to tell Elkire what he knew. Beard said he didn't write the statement that he had signed, but that Elkire had. Beard said that he gave Elkire some ideas, and they made it up together as they went along. I mean, it's just crazy.
It's totally off the wall.
And not to mention unethical. So on Wednesday, April 4th, 1983, Elkire got a telephone call saying that a man named Harold McMillan had walked into the jail, saying he knew who was responsible for the Rainbow murders. Later that night, McMillan told the troopers that Bobby Lee Morrison Jr. had seen Gerald Brown kill the Rainbow Girls. Robert Gerald Morrison, Bobby Lee's father, was interviewed, and he confirmed that his son had told him that he had seen Gerald Brown kill Vicki and Nancy. So after learning that Bobby Lee worked for Jake Beard, the state police went to Beard's farm. And now it's April 6, 1983. They found Bobby Lee working there in the garage. So he was picked up between 10 a.m. and noon. Elkire's notes show that he was read his rights at 2:09 p.m. Elkire, with 3 other troopers there, interrogated Bobby Lee Morrison about the Rainbow murders. He denied any knowledge of the crimes. Elkire told him about the allegations, but Bobby Lee still denied knowing anything about the murders, and he continued to say this for hours. But then, at 4:45 p.m., for some reason he changed his story, and he said that he had been there when Gerald Brown killed the 2 women. Starting at about noon or 1 p.m. on June 25, 1980, Morrison told Elkire he and Gerald Brown spent a few hours drinking beer in a bar in Hillsboro. After that, they went joyriding in Brown's pickup truck. They saw 2 girls walking along the road on the right-hand side, he said, and they stopped and asked them if they wanted a ride. The girls said sure, and they got up front with them. Then they drove to Droop Mountain and Briery Knob. They had been passing a jug of moonshine and talked about smoking some dope. So according to Bobby Lee, Gerald was driving, and he passed out. Then he was awakened by the sound of a gunshot. He heard another gunshot and saw a second flash. Brown threatened him, saying that if he didn't help, he'd be next. So Bobby Lee climbed out of the truck and saw both women lying on the ground. The 2 of them then loaded the dead women into the bed of the truck. Brown then drove a short distance and put the bodies in a field. Bobby Lee said that Brown had used either a .38 or a .357 to shoot the women. He only heard 2 shots, but said there may have been more than that. Bobby Lee then told Elkire that he had helped Brown clean up the blood, and he had not mentioned the killings to Brown since the incident had happened. So it was 6:05 p.m. when Bobby Lee finished making his statement. Bobby Lee was polygraphed after that and was found to be truthful. The prosecutor and his assistant came over and looked over Bobby Lee's confession, and they decided to file a 2-count first-degree murder charge against Gerald Brown and a warrant for accessory to a felony against Bobby Lee Morrison. At 8:45 that night, Bobby Lee Morrison was arraigned and held in jail pending a bail hearing. Gerald Brown was arrested the very next day. Bobby Lee asked Elkhire not to put him in a cell with Gerald Brown, and Elkhire agreed to that. Brown denied killing anyone, but his ex-girlfriend told investigators that she had met Brown shortly before the Rainbow event had started. She said that one day they were riding around together, and she made the comment that one day she was going to kill her husband, who she was separated from. Then she said Brown told her, "No, you wouldn't want to kill anyone, believe me. I know how it feels." So once while riding in Brown's truck, she said she found a necklace, and she told Brown that she really liked it and asked if she could have it. And he said, "Yes, you can have it. It belonged to one of my Rainbow friends, and she won't be ever coming back." The girlfriend later gave the necklace to the police, and she told them that Brown kept a pistol with a long barrel under the front seat of his truck. Brown, though, declined to take a polygraph and refused to give a police statement. According to the book Life Without Mercy by Ralph Kennedy Eccles, Deborah Fialco, and a West Virginia State Police investigator who worked on the case, told him they had a little party over in Marlinton after they arrested Gerald Brown. Elkhire thought he had solved the Rainbow murder case, but it didn't take too long for it to look like they hadn't solved anything. They had egg on their faces.
Well, they were hoping to solve this crime, right?
Well, they're going about it the wrong way.
Yeah, but it was getting to the point where they just needed to do something.
Well, sure, but that's not the way to do it.
That's true. I won't argue that.
Okay, well, you've got to do something, but putting an innocent man in prison is not the way to do it. Not at all.
Well, we know that Gerald Brown had nothing at all to do with killing Nancy Santomero and Vicki Durian. But why did Bobby Lee Morrison lie to the police? The Greenbrier County attorney who represented Gerald Brown said that they would never know for sure, but one story was that Bobby Lee had a relative who was having problems with the law in Pocahontas. And after Bobby Lee came up with a story about the Rainbow murders, the legal problems went away.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Yes, it is. And there's another possibility, in that the state police pressured Bobby Lee into making a confession.
It would be easy. These people aren't super educated.
I know. So it doesn't sound far-fetched. Bobby Lee had claimed that the state police picked him up around 10 a.m. on April 6, 1983. Jake Beard thought that they took Bobby Lee into custody at about 11. Beard's garage is about a 30-minute drive to the state police office. But Bobby Lee's confession didn't start until 4:45 p.m.
So that's a lot of time.
So if Beard or Bobby Lee was right about the time the arrest was made, Bobby Lee would have been in custody for 5 or 6 hours before he made the confession. And this would be more than enough time to force a confession.
Right, but they really didn't have any evidence of police coercion. Whatever the reason for this false confession, Bobby Lee probably didn't think he'd spend much time in jail. He probably thought he could just tell some lies about Gerald Brown and they'd let him go home. You hear it all the time with these false confessions. They just wanted to go home and they'd say whatever. But after spending more than 2 weeks in jail, Bobby Lee began to get worried.
So the police hadn't put Bobby Lee in the same cell as Gerald Brown, but they had put them in cells close enough so that they could talk to each other. Instead of threatening Bobby Lee, Brown approached him with a plan that could get them both out of jail. So Bobby Lee decided, it sounds reasonable, I'm going to follow that advice.
Right, so this is where Jake Beard really gets screwed over. Going along with what Brown had told him, Bobby Lee went to the police and said that it was actually Jacob Beard who was behind the whole thing and had threatened him and told him to lie. In late April, Elkhire called Jake Beard and asked him to come back to the station. He said it was very important. Beard agreed, as he always had. So Beard talked with Elkhire in a back room at the station for quite a while, and then a deputy came in with Bobby Lee Morrison. Bobby Lee then told a story about how Beard had made him tell the police that Gerald Brown had killed the Rainbow Girls. He said that Beard had threatened him and his family. Then after Bobby Lee was taken back to his cell, Beard would recall that Elkhire asked him if there was anything to the story, and Beard had said hell no. Then Elkhire had smiled at him and shook his hand and let Beard go home. So Beard assumed that no one was believing that story. But that was not the case at all, really.
Quite the opposite.
Yes. In October 1983, a grand jury convened. Bobby Lee Morrison appeared before the jury and told them that Jake Beard had made him tell the police a false story about Gerald Brown and the Rainbow murders. Weeks later, at the end of the grand jury session, a no bill was returned in Gerald Brown's favor, but murder charges against Brown wouldn't be dismissed until January of 1984. Rumors and accusations continued to swirl all around Pocahontas County. No one was prosecuted for Vicki and Nancy's murders for 13 years. Then, 9 local people were arrested and charged with crimes connected to the killings. 2 confessed, and 4 accused other people in sworn statements. But in 1993, the state of West Virginia chose to prosecute just one man, and that was Jacob Beard, who they believed was the trigger man. Beard had moved to Florida in 1991 to be near his elderly parents, so he thought he'd put all this behind him.
Well, yeah.
In 92, after living and working in Florida for close to 2 years, Beard knew the chief of police in Crescent City, Florida. The car dealership where he was working serviced some of the city's police vehicles. Beard was the service manager, and he was actually good friends with one of the officers. This officer told Beard that when he heard that Beard was going to be picked up on 2 counts of murder, the chief and no one on the force could even believe it.
Putnam County was taking care of Beard's arrest. Al Kier had talked to the sheriff and told him that Beard was to be considered armed and dangerous. They got the SWAT team ready to take him down. They were going to break down Beard's door and storm into his house, scaring his wife and children.
Yeah, Beard's friend said that the Crescent City chief told them all that that would not be necessary, but the Putnam County sheriff had a plan. Whenever the alarm at the car dealership went off after hours, the police would call the owner. And Beard was the second on the list to respond when the owner wasn't available. So the sheriff's plan was to have Beard's boss call him and tell him that the alarm was going off and ask him to go out to the dealership and take care of it. So when Beard left his house, the SWAT team grabbed him before he could get into his car. Beard ended up staying in jail in Florida for about a week, and then he was flown to West Virginia. Beard hired an attorney from Charleston named Robert Allen. Now, the state's case was wholly based on the word of 2 men who were both offered immunity in exchange for their testimony. Both witnesses were physically assaulted by West Virginia state police officers, too. And Beard was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
3 men, prosecution witnesses testified, had picked up Vicki and Nancy hitchhiking and then driven them into the woods, where other men joined them. The men drank, smoked weed, according to the prosecution's theory, and then they tried to rape Vicki and Nancy. When the women struggled and threatened to go to the police, Beard shot them. One of the witnesses said that he had repressed his memories of the murders for many years, but later recovered them.
That's always a big red flag, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Well, since 1984, Joseph Paul Franklin, who was already in federal prison in Illinois for murders he had committed throughout the late 1970s and the early 1980s, told an investigator that he shot and killed 2 women in the woods of West Virginia. Franklin had made confessions before that he would change his mind about, and he also had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Law enforcement didn't believe his confession, and the judge in Beard's case agreed with that. But then in 1996, after learning that Beard was doing his prison time, Franklin was insistent in taking responsibility for Vicki and Nancy's murders. Beard's attorney presented a sworn deposition from Franklin, saying he had killed the women. So in January 1999, a writ of habeas corpus was granted, and a new trial was ordered for Beard, and Beard was released on bond.
So a jury acquitted Beard on May 31st, 2000. Beard later filed a wrongful conviction lawsuit against Pocahontas County authorities, and in January 2003, they agreed to a $2 million settlement. Franklin has never been tried for the Rainbow murders. He admitted that he shot Larry Flint because of a spread Hustler ran that featured a black man and a white woman. But Franklin wasn't convicted in this case either. But he did confess to the shooting several years after it happened.
Right. He was executed in 2013 in Missouri, where he had been convicted of killing Gerald Gordon in a sniper shooting at a suburban St. Louis synagogue in 1977. Franklin was convicted of 7 other murders, and he claimed responsibility for up to 20. But the Missouri case was the only one that earned him a death sentence. All of his murders targeted minorities or people who had been in relationships with the minority person. So, he's gone. But can you just imagine what Beard went through? I can't.
No.
I mean, it seems like he really had his life together in Florida when they came and got him. But you just have to wonder, did the police even really believe that confession, or did they just want to solve it for the sake of solving it? Which doesn't seem right at all.
No, but I think they did want to get it solved.
Well, yeah, but part of getting it solved should be getting the right person.
Well, you prefer getting the right person.
It would
yes.
make it nice. Yeah, that's always nice to get the right person. So I had never heard of this story, and I just found it fascinating. The Larry Flynt part was a real surprise to me. I'd never heard of it. And actually, when Franklin was on death row, Larry Flynt didn't want him to get the death penalty. He didn't want him put to death. He actually tried to stop it because he was against the death penalty. So long story short, folks, I broke my leg while walking our dog Gomez a couple of days ago. So we decided we're going to put off feedback until next time just to make it a little bit easier on me. No worries, though, because we have your emails and your voicemails, and we're going to address them in the next episode. I do have a bit of housekeeping before we go. We received an amazing number of comments on our comments about how Jennifer Carpenter Coquelich and Bruce Coquelich left dirty dishes in the bedroom and living room, and how the Murdoch family did that too, leaving them for their housekeeper to pick up and clean. But I just want to clarify that I'm not judging anyone for being messy or not picking up their dishes right away. What I was being judgy about was the fact that they left them for the housekeeper. To me, it just seemed a bit disrespectful. If you're lucky enough to afford a housekeeper, I just think it would be better to at least put your dishes in the sink for her. And that's just my opinion, of course. So I apologize if I offended any of you messy people out there. A quick reminder to our listeners that we do have a premium option of TCB, which gives you early, ad-free, and bonus shows to listen to. We always do a bonus case each month, plus we've been throwing in a recap and discussion of a true crime show, often Dateline. Like over the past few months, we covered Dateline Unforgettable episodes that we rewatched and talked about. It's less formal than a normal episode, but lots of fun to do, and I think you might enjoy listening. If this does interest you, we do appreciate the support, and we will work hard to give you entertaining bonus shows. And if you prefer, you can also subscribe at patreon.com/tiegrabber instead and get the same benefits. Of course, other ways to support our show are to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen. Send us an email or a voicemail with some feedback and suggestions. We love to get those. Or just tell some of your friends that are into true crime to check out our show, because word of mouth cannot be underestimated, for sure. If you do have feedback or case suggestions for us to cover on an upcoming show, please send your email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com, and voicemails can be sent by clicking on the voicemail link in our show notes or on our website. Thank you again for spending your time with us. We do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time at The Quiet End.
We'll save some seats for you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, guys.